So I will start, as always, with a short introduction and talk a little bit about SIFTA, and then I will hand over to Clementine, our speaker today. So let me share my slides. So today we are talking about capital solutions for the social economy, and Clementine will showcase some examples how non-profits or other actors in the sector can attract funding for different purposes. And I'm really, really curious about what you have for us today. Let's talk about some house rules. This session will last around about 90 minutes. We will have time for your questions. The webinar will be recorded, and afterwards you can revisit the webinar. We will send you a link to the recording, and we will also share the slides with you via email. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand or use the chat function, and we will accommodate your questions as soon as possible. So what is SIFTA? SIFTA is a small component of the Invest EU Advisory Hub, and there's a window for microfinance and social enterprise finance. And under this window, we organize these webinars and horizontal learning events. The program is managed by the European Investment Bank and provides targeted capacity building, project advisory, and market development support to financial intermediaries active in the microfinance and or social entrepreneurship space. Basically, under SIFTA, you can have access to two distinct forms of technical assistance. One is project advisory, capacity building, and market development. And the other strand is rating, assessment, and evaluation. If you want to benefit from SIFTA, your organization needs to be registered in one of the EU 27 member states. Originally, the budget was allocated until December 2027, and now the program has been extended to December 2027. So beneficiaries, as I said, could be microfinance provider, banks, non-bank microfinance institutes, social enterprise finance providers, investment funds, impact investors, incubators, accelerators, among others. So the program is implemented by a consortium led by Frankfurt School and the Microfinance Center based in Poland and the European Microfinance Center based in Belgium. The advisory, evaluation, and ratings is provided by MFR based in Italy. If you want to get in touch with us, again, you will have the slides. You can use one of the links, inform yourself about the SIFTA services on the EIB website. If you want to request services, send an email to sifta@eib.org. You will have to complete a request for service template, and that officially starts the process. So again, if you want to learn more, you can contact us directly, either SIFTA support at Frankfurt School or at MF Rating. So that would be it from my side. And now I would like to hand over to Clementine.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Alors. Do you see?
Yes.
The slides, right? So very pleased to be with you for this session on what we call capital solutions for the social economy. So I'm Clémentine Blasi. I will just, so this you touched upon already, Jörg. I will just introduce myself very briefly. So I've been in the social finance / impact investing sector for the last almost 20 years now. And the experience I mostly gathered at France Active, which is a social finance provider in France. And there I headed the what's called the tailored funding and non-financial support practice within the national head of this network of local association. And over the last 5 years, I've been also collaborating with Mirova, which is a sustainable finance actor, subsidiary of a banking group in France dedicated to, which developed several social finance tools, including Solidarity Fund. And there I'm working with the team managing a 90-10 fund, 90% being invested alongside SRI criteria and 10% being invested into social enterprises. So I'm working with the team, which is entitled for the investment of this 10%. And I'm also an advisor to FITRUS, which is an impact fund, one of the pioneer social impact fund in France, also active in Europe and currently deploying a fund called FITRUS Partenaire Inclusion in France, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and other countries in Europe, possibly. Yeah, and what can I add on this? I think that would be all. Let's just move to the European Center for Social Finance. Maybe you came across our organization during the SIFTA program, so maybe I will not develop any further. But it's one of the happy partner of the EMN under this SIFTA program. So this would be the agenda for this workshop. So I will start with an overview of the specificities of equity financing and equity financing within the social economy. The idea is also to understand what is the status quo and what are the challenges that the sector is faced with, both from the demand side and the supply side, so from the investee and the social finance / impact fund actors, so the one deploying the capital, the one who receive the capital or try to receive it, better put, and eventually also understand the instrument or the financing structure that could help circumvent all those challenges, all these issues. So financing structure of social enterprise, what is equity financing, these status quos and challenges, and we will look into hybridization, which is really a little key when it comes to circumventing all the hindrances of social enterprise when accessing to long-term resources. And do not hesitate to ask if anything is unclear. So just a very quick intro as to the financing structure of social enterprises. And really, in a nutshell, we could sum up the seminar and say just it's the hybridization. So it's really the key to all these or many of these issues. So social enterprises are, as you know, a hybrid organization because they try to combine social and commercial goals. And we can take a brief look at the different layers where social enterprises are eager to improve their structure to best deliver their impact. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you have the revenue structure. This is one layer of the financing, overall financing of the impact of social enterprise. At the core, you have the operating structure, so how social enterprises better cover its cost structure. And at the left-hand side, you have the capital structure, which will be the core topic of today's session. So if we take a look at the revenue structure level, you, of course, have come across many types of hybrid revenue. the typical revenue structure, hybrid revenue structure that you might come across, which is quite complex, as social impact bonds. So you also have less complex outcome-based contract, and here the idea is that the level of revenue depend on the achievement of a certain impact. Of a certain impact milestone. Typically, here I put as an illustration Duo for a Job, which is an enterprise, a social enterprise based in Belgium. And here the development was accelerated thanks to such a social impact bonds that was financed by Actiris, so the public actor entitled for all the employment policy. And so the increased revenue was based on the number of mentees, coach, and other qualitative different criteria that would assess the success of their operation. So that would be one way to increase or improve more the revenue structure of the social enterprise. On the operation structure level, so really the middle layer, we talk about the type of operating grants that will support part of the operating costs of the social enterprise at seed stage, but also in the long run, because sometimes it's just key to the sustainability of the social enterprise. So the typical illustration would be a support of cost structure of work integration social enterprise based on the number of persons they employ and the positive outcome when they get out of the enterprise and find a sustainable employment position. So you have many illustrations for these types of grants or hybridization of model to better cover the cost structure and to fund really the social mission. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, you have refugee company that supports newcomer in gaining a work experience and offering them a perspective. So through a workland program. So here they created this social enterprise called A Beautiful Mess, and which is a social enterprise designed as a restaurant. And they receive subsidies from government, from foundation to cover part of this exploitation, the rest being coming from very classical commercial revenue. And here I put also Le Trusquin, for instance, is a work-based training company in Belgium. Again, receiving a dual revenue stream and part of it being support from the local authority to cover part of the social mission, which is really providing first and hands-on experience to people with no specific level of education or qualified level of education. And I don't know if you know VRAC or if you heard about VRAC. It's just to give a glimpse of the diversity of social enterprises. So VRAC, that one is a French social enterprise, and their objective is to make quality food products more accessible to residents of low-income neighborhoods. And what they do is they develop groups for purchasing quality products, so organic, ethical, local, etc. And so to do this, these products are bought by residents, but at an accessible price. So there is this commercial revenue, but they work together with the social landlords, local authority, and also foundation, which will cover part of their operating cost in order to enable this social mission to be accomplished. So voilà. And en fait, very often, the hybridization will come at these two levels, so really revenue structure, operating structure. For instance, if we go back to the example of the work integration social enterprise, there will be a revenue, like a kind of fixed revenue indexed on the number of people that you employ, which are away from classic employment, and then you will get a kind of a success remuneration, a remuneration based on success, which will be the number of people actually actually accessing a positive exit at the end of their contract within the social enterprise. And now we have reached the third level of the financing structure of a social enterprise. So this capital structure. So this is the one we will focus most during this session. This is the balance sheet, basically, and the upper level of the balance sheet, so to say. So the equity that it has, that it can rely on, and that can leverage the debt that we enable to the social enterprise to fund its development. So in the case of a social enterprise, you will find mostly impact investor, social finance investor in the equity of the company, and to access to loans, they can also have the support of guarantee schemes that can be extremely important and kind of key to reduce the appraisal of the risk by the bank, because the social enterprise might have a little equity to rely on, and might be perceived as more risk-bearing, and so therefore guarantee tools are extremely important to get access to a bank. And there are quite a few guarantee tools, depending on the market, on the social finance market in Europe, that are really proving their efficiency when it comes to financing the development of social enterprises. And there I put two illustrations of social enterprises which benefited both, benefited at least from investors in their own equity. And actually, when it comes to Lavarap, it's both equity and also guarantee to get a better quality loan. So Auticon, I don't know if you know them. So it's a German company. It's an IT service provider. And what makes them special is that they exclusively employ people on the autism spectrum as a consultant in these IT, finance, insurance sectors. And so they develop their activity not only in Germany but also in France and in Austria. And it's quite big in terms of numbers, social enterprise, because they have a turnover of around 50 million euro, and they employ several hundred employees, and they were happy enough to welcome within their equity very early on, not only very how do you say? I was going to say wealthy individuals, but high net worth individuals as investors, as well as impact investors from Germany and also from Norway. And so these have been really key to fuel the development of Auticon, definitely. And in France, Lavarap, it's a work integration social enterprises. And again, they are active in different sectors, but they grew very, not very fast, but over the last 15 years, they started with a non-profit, created a for-profit, able to take on equity. And today they are a kind of a group which has a 100 million euro turnover and several thousand employees, because it's also more of a, they have an, how do you say, a temporary work agency alongside the more longer term contract, which explains the high number of employees. So that was a long introduction on the different stages of hybridization that you can find when it comes to financing the development of social enterprises. And now maybe I can move to, voila. The very third layer, really to focus on this layer of the capital structure, which is the focus of today. So solid equity, this is essential, of course, to develop, to be sustainable over time, to leverage debt, to weather storm when they come. And actually, at the moment, they do come. So it's all the more so important to have long-term resources to rely on. So in this very small part, we touch upon a few essential characteristics of equity as a financing tool, and also look at different types of equity that are being used really mainstream and also in the social enterprises fields. So which we call a hardcore equity, so to say. And then we'll see later on other tools that are maybe more adapted to the context of social enterprises. So this would be the summary of the characteristics of equity financing. And I just try to highlight the pros and cons from an investor point of view and from an investee point of view. The investee being the blue one. So what is really key in equity is the notion of co-ownership. So as an equity investor or as an equity owner, you co-own the object called enterprise, right? So which means that you are there for essentially an unlimited time. So a liquidity that is quite not obvious compared to a loan, of course. You must not be repaid. There is no obligation to repay you because you are an owner. And leading on from this, you have the less preferential treatment in case of bankruptcy. Huh? Of course, all the lenders will be disinterested prior to you, and if there is anything left, then you might become a few of the leftovers, so to say, in very crude terms. So, of course, when we say unlimited time, the typical equity investor will usually organize beforehand its exit. There will be a shareholder agreement that will try and secure a little liquidity, saying like in 4 or 5 years time, we will meet and try and design options to exit, blah, 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 etc. Enfin, bon, bref, usually, and of course, as an investor, you think beforehand, before investing, what are the exit options that you have at hand before entering. But there is no formal engagement. And again, no repayment installments such as in a loan. So you have more risk and less liquidity. And this comes, of course, with specific retribution, sorry. So there is an increase in valuation. So what you own should be, I mean, at least that's the way it is thought, increasing in value as long as the enterprise grows. You also get voting rights, so you get to have an influence on the way the enterprise develops, and you can also get access to part of what the value generated is part of the value generated by the enterprise. So, so the net result and the dividend that can be paid out. So typically in private equity, it's not the typical revenue case for an investor. It will be more the revenue that comes from the sale of the enterprise, or the enterprise being sold, and the valuation of the share, that there will come the retribution for the investor instead of dividend payment. Dividend payment will be more linked to your ownership of a public equity, right? But however, it can happen. Of course, co-ownership has a very distinct meaning in the social economy. When we come to voting rights, as co-owner of a co-op, for instance, usually it's one person, one vote. It doesn't depend on the level of the level of capital that you own. If you provide the most part of the capital, you won't have the most weight on the way decisions are being taken. I mean, at least from the statutes, from the statutory rating, and it varies from one country to another. But for instance, I think in Germany it's a bit different. In France, it's really one person, one vote, and then there are options, of course, to create a more weight in the governance as an investor. But really, the original idea is to decorrelate the ownership of the equity and your influence on the governance. So that's one thing. And then there is no increase in valuation of the share for co-ops, or very little. I mean, nothing compared to what you can imagine with a more mainstream enterprise. So these are two very specificities when it comes to equity investment that are hindrances, so to say, for a mainstream investor to invest in co-op, or needless to say, in a non-profit where there is no ownership at all, because it's owned by the community, so to say, and there is no ownership materialized. Alors, I was mentioning different types of equity capital that come in the mainstream environment, but are a lot used also by social enterprises. So there is this bootstrapping. There is also external equity financing, so venture capital and private equity. And then we will see a little bit later on what can be an in-between, which in between debt and equity, that can be a good option for social enterprises. So quasi-equity, mezzanine capital. But we will touch upon those elements a little later on. And please do not hesitate if you have any question. So this would be an illustration of a slide just to explain a little bit more about bootstrapping. I guess you came across this notion already. So it refers to business who grow without external funding, meaning that they will rely on, I mean, the founders, to say, will rely on their personal savings, income streams from the activity, per se, grants they can gather from competition, other income streams from the founders, and this all will help put on its feet the enterprise and start growing. And it's quite appealing on one hand, because it grants you the full ownership of your project. You don't have to share governance with external investors. We have their own vision of the way the enterprise is supposed to go, and you have more flexibility in the trajectory that you design. But of course, because these grants from competitions and the revenue generated by the business can be a little bit limited, I mean, it can really kind of impair the growth, depending also on the type of activity that you develop. So what would be an example? I put on the upper right side of the slide this logo from Le Monde d'Aiden. So that's a Belgian social enterprise, and that's a good example of bootstrapping. This enterprise, this is they call themselves, at least, the first inclusive indoor playground, and it was established in 2020 as a non-profit organization. by Lou Garignani, she's a mother of 4 children, and one of whom has a significant genetic condition resulting in severe disability. And her vision was to create this adapted, tailored space to meet the needs of all children, regardless of their age and abilities. And so she created this ASBL, so Association Sans But Lucratif, so Belgium version of a non-profit. And over the course of 4 years, actually, she really created this first playground, designed it, opened it, and ramped it up. And at the time she crossed the road of Fitrust, actually, she was hiring already 7 full-time employees, and 4 of them with disabilities. And so that's an interesting that's an interesting example of how how far bootstrapping can get you. But at some point, you get limited in your development. For instance, if you want to create another indoor playground somewhere else, and you need to take on debt, etc. If you haven't piled up enough equity, then it's going to be difficult to negotiate this with your financing partners. I don't know if this notion of bootstrapping is familiar to you, but I guess yes. And if we just this is mostly probably very well known of you, the typical growth curve, which is never exactly the same, but schematically described growth curve of any kind of enterprise. And for each stage, there should be very specific type of actors providing specific type of equity. So that will be in the more mainstream world, so to say, but in which also social enterprises, I mean, some of them can tap into. So when bootstrapping is not enough, this is where venture capital, alongside, of course, equity crowdfunding, friends and families, business angel, comes into play. And so there is usually a distinction between venture capital and growth capital, where venture capital will focus more on the startup accelerating phases, and growth will be more come into play for mature companies. So let's say, which we put on the slide, over 10 million euro turnover. So really different type of actors, different type of also of involvement within as a non-financial support provider, I mean, within the governance, etc. And also the type of strategy in terms of equity ownership. You will, the more upper you move on this curve, the more the bigger you get in terms of equity stakes these actors are going to look for. Voilà. So what can I add on this slide? So both venture capital and growth capital will target, of course, an exit in a fixed horizon, either secondary sale. What's called secondary sale is selling your stake to a follow-up investor or follow-on investor, or an industrial acquisition, so by a competitor, or IPO, which is absolutely not an option for social economy, of course. Yes, Jörg.
I have a question. So, I mean, obviously, I guess we all came across these words like desert crossing, valley of death, the growth crisis, or have experienced it ourselves. I was wondering, like, this seed funding, or even worse, pre-seed funding, that is more like desert crossing without any water, right? So it's almost impossible to get any kind of funding here? Or
I would say really what's, I mean, at least in that slide, this desert crossing would be more of you design your pilot. or you're more in the really the conception phase? So you design your innovation, etc. So it doesn't mean that you don't get any funding. So typically there you will get very specific grants, etc. But at some points, once you have designed your little pilot, there you need to elaborate, sort of, and this is where it can be difficult to get funding. And seed funding, actually, there is typically for social enterprises there is not much, and it's quite easy. I mean, it's quite easy to explain. The typical model of this venture capital would be super high risk, high risk appetite, but a high level of return expected on at least one front runner, which will make I don't know. I mean, double-digit times your investment, and this, when it comes to social enterprises, is rather not that simple to achieve. Voilà. So yeah, that's what so 10 times your original investment in 7 years would be the target overall on your fund. So meaning that if you encounter a certain number of failure, you can imagine the multiple that you need to make on your front runners that will make over for the rest of the failures, so to say. But actually there are a few, and that has been also the beauty of Easy Program, InvestEU, etc. The really window focusing on social finance. There are more of those actors focused on younger stages and seed stages, also for social enterprises, and they designed also a specific business model to comply with the specificities, so to say, of social enterprises, and the fact that you are not going to shoot for the stars with one social enterprise. I don't know if it answers the question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Answered my question. Thank you.
So we touch upon a little bit generally or generically on equity financing, and now we just try and take a look at what is equity financing for the social economy. So to what extent equity financing is a well-accessible mode of financing for social enterprises. So that would be our take at the center on this question. When we look at the numbers, it's maybe not so much a very high tapped into resource for social enterprises, this equity financing. So there was a study done by the Center for the Commission on a social finance market that really stated that debt is really overwhelming compared with equity when it comes to social enterprises finance strategy. There is also a comparative synthesis report on social enterprises and their ecosystem in Europe by the European Commission that stated that demand was quite low when it came to equity. So is it a question of demand or supply? That's always one part of the question or the equation. So in fact, I'm not so sure that it is a question of low demand. It's more a difficulty of access, and actually, in any case, there is a need for these long-term resources. So there is this study done in France by ESS France. So it's an organization mobilizing the whole social economy in France, stating that at least 30% from social enterprise suffer from a financial structure that is qualified as precarious, so low equity, high indebtedness. So 30%, you might say, well, it's not much, but yeah, at least it's quite concerning. And I would say it's all the more concerning at times where public funding dramatically drops, and that requires from you, if you have a heavily relying on business model on those public resources to completely adjust, and adjustment requires a little time, especially when we're talking about social missions. So I mean, the less robust is your financial structure, the higher the mortality rate will be within social enterprises if we are faced with a population that is with this really under-financing equity financial structure. So I would say this state of fact is extremely concerning at the moment. And in the UK, which is not in the EU anymore, but have interesting literature on the topic, there was a survey conducted now in 2020, but I would assume it doesn't change dramatically since. So this survey stated that 1 in 5 social enterprises actually need equity-like funding based on their financial situation, so their ratio of indebtedness, etc., and also their development trends and development strategies. But 1 in 5 so have this need, but only 3 times less are in the process of actually raising equity. So it was all a question of, again, is the resource scarce or the demand low, or is there a need? Yes, but there is a kind of a mismatch there. And as I was telling Jörg before the actual launch of the webinar, there is not that much documented on the really equity structure, financial structure of social enterprises in Europe, I mean, recently. And I bet it's an interesting topic. And so where would this come from, this whole situation? And what really distinguishes also equity and debt? These are observations that we made like based on the study that I mentioned from the center on the estimating the financing gap for social enterprises, and also based on our groundwork with social finance provider, also among the under the SIFTA program and the EasyTA program prior to this. So when we talk about debt, there are in the social finance sector large number of transactions, really standardized products, quite an industrialized way of providing debt. It differs from one country or another, but generally speaking, it would be this. You can get standardized way of measuring impact when there is impact measurement. I mean, quite well established impact measurement methodology on very simple KPIs of impact. And when talking again about impact measurement and management, there will be a focus on pre-investment impact measurement. So really as one part of the investment decision, and no real ongoing impact measurement and management along the way. So it's interesting to have this in mind because it speaks also from the business model of a debt provider. So this ongoing impact measurement is maybe less on the cost structure of those finance providers. When we talk about equity, there are obviously a way smaller number of large transactions, or enough transactions in general. We are talking about highly individualized product. I mean, when you provide equity, you discuss a certain number of issues, you establish a shareholder agreement, etc. And it also speaks for the less liquidity of the product, etc. But it speaks for a very high individualized product. and also individually designed impact measurement and management system. There are due diligence on impact pre-investment, and of course, there are also impact milestones and generally an extra financial business plan that will be really followed during the time of the investment, and also an extensive reporting. So there are completely different products, different ways of and different practices. Alors, looking at the demand side, so investee, again, there was this first observation of this gap between what would be seen as a need for equity and what is the actual demand. So that was the UK study that I mentioned, and just to nuance also this, there has also been a report from the Commission that also highlights the very high heterogeneity within the EU of supply and demand throughout the member states. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and this observation is not valid for all countries, right? But so if we state the fact that there is this gap, and we try to look at the causes, the need for and the ability to take on equity for a social enterprise depends on of several factors, right? There are external factors. So is there offer? So is there a social finance market that is mature enough to cover these needs? So are there a provider of long-term patient capital, equity capital? Is there also a supporting ecosystem that is able to make the social enterprise, to say, investment ready, and to support them throughout their raising process, which can be quite tedious, I must say. So that would be the external factors. And when it comes to internal, there are, of course, the stage of development is key. Jörg mentioned and highlighted the possible difficulty to raise seed money. Yes, indeed, that's one difficult stage to fund. Business model is how I would say is quite critical. So the more scalable is your business model. So if you have a business model that has at certain tipping points can grow the revenue without growing that much the cost structure, so that would be what I call a scalable business, then it will be surely more easy for you to get equity funding than if you have something less of a boring business, so to say. I mean, normal business that where things grow kind of parallel with, of course, on the plus side. You will be less an object for venture capital. And on that note, what we can say is that there are lots of comment. There have been lots of talks around this lockstep business model. So really, this business model where it's like the unicorn of a social enterprise, where your revenue grows alongside your impact and really exponentially. And this does exist, but it's not. It does not speak of the majority of the social enterprises. So the social venture capital or impact fund will tend to focus on this very small portion of social enterprises that comply with this type of business model. I don't know if I'm clear, so do not hesitate to ask if I need to clarify. But that will be so the type of business model that are more or less adequate to take on equity. And of course, the legal form we mentioned earlier, and you knew before even joining the webinar, that as a non-profit, you cannot offer equity share to your investors. So you need to find another way to fund yourself. And as a cooperative, again, your capital does not increase at all, or does not increase that much in value. So is per se not a very interesting, financially speaking, investment for an investor. And on top of this, the investor doesn't get a lot of say in the development of the enterprise. So it's more than a leap of faith for him. And maybe I can elaborate a little bit on the challenges. So that was something that was highlighted in this study from the Unlimited, SMA Foundation, etc., from the UK. So a few roadblocks that have to get passed for social enterprises to raise equity. There is first and foremost lack of awareness and understanding. What are we talking about? Lack of investment readiness. Of course, there have been a lot of programs in that sense. So a lot of progress have been made. And what a reluctance from the side of the investee, which is due to this fear of power sharing linked to the governance. And this fear of power sharing is probably increased by your social mission. So you don't want anyone, anybody to come and tell you how you should do things. So it's a more fragile object, kind of. And if you let an external investor come in, you anticipate conflicts between financial shareholders and the social objectives of the enterprises. Voilà. So some social enterprises are not so keen to share the steering wheel with, of course, with any kind of investor, but with investors at all. Voilà. Although there are quite a broad base of documented case study which prove that it's possible, of course. And so I encourage you to have a look at them. So there are shareholders agreements, governance structure that help maintaining and reinforcing the social mission while taking on external equity. And for some of social enterprises also, equity investment, can be perceived as less flexible than debt, which for me comes as a surprise, but voilà. Other hindrances, internal hindrances as to the request of equity financing can be the price, definitely. So of course, it's one important decision when you take on any type of financing. So when we talk about equity, like really equity stakes, I said there is no remuneration, like recurring remuneration, but there is an increase, or there should be an increase. Ideally, everybody wish for it in the valuation of the share. But so it's a complicated equation between the investor that are coming in, the price they want to reach at the exit, etc. So that's the fact that there is no recurring revenue doesn't mean that it doesn't cost anything to the enterprise. So that's one thing. And if you set a price very high, it will put a lot of pressure also on you as an entrepreneur to deliver the value that you say is crystallized within your valuation. So no dividend paid at some point, or no interest paid because it's equity, doesn't mean that it doesn't cost anything. So it comes at a price. And also when we talk about more equity-like type of instruments, so mezzanine debt, etc., of course, or convertible bonds, of course, it comes at a higher price than senior debt, because the risk is higher. Of course, there are kind of concessional convertible bonds coming from social finance provider because they design themselves a business model that allow them to offer this type of product at a reduced price. But in any case, it's pricier than a debt. But it doesn't mean, that the fact that it's pricier is also, it's true. But when you get this equity or equity-like instrument, you also get access to debt and you have an improved financial structure that allows you for a better development. A legal structure we already touched upon. So that would be, but we can add more blue circles, and the typical features that would be for a social enterprise compliant investor. So patient, long-term partnership, an exit strategy that can be really impact oriented. So meaning, if you put yourself, if you are yourself a social investor, it means also that you do not have as many exit options as a mainstream investor would have, because you have to design impact-oriented exit strategies. You have a pricing that supports mission, and you are able to navigate this capital decorrelated governance. So we touched upon supply side. Not really. So let's maybe have a look at it. So I could have put the same curve, like desert crossing and then leap of faith, etc. So the different stage of growth for any kind of enterprises. There are actually a variety of investors that are providing equity capital to social enterprises, and that also throughout the different stages of development of these enterprises. But as I mentioned before, the landscape differs a lot from one country to another. So the social finance markets differs in maturity and in offer from one member state to the other. So what we can say more generally speaking is that as you highlighted, Jörg, angel capital is not very common was not very common in the social finance field yet. And it's more informal, based on personal connections, etc. EIF had launched this financial instrument that was targeted at business angel. I think it wasn't as successful as expected to support really initiative of more group of individuals designing platforms for business angels, etc. However, there has been a few projects targeting business angels for social finance investment in different countries, and that launched and grew in France, in Croatia. And actually in France, the landscape is really diversifying itself. There are more than one actor. So in any case, crowdfunding still plays a very important role. And here I'm talking about equity crowdfunding. So here I put a few examples. You have Lita, which is active in Belgium, in France, and not anymore in Italy. Spreads in Belgium. One Planet Crowd, I'm not so sure anymore where this actor is based. I would say Germany. Voilà. Business angel, we touched upon. So you have this impact business angel. In terms of social venture capital, you have all the network members of the network of Impact Europe. Alors, it's a very broad church, so you have all type of actors underneath. But however, you would find most of the social venture capital within this network. And on this slide, we also mention co-ops. Actually, the role and extent of cooperative within social finance has not been researched in depth yet, from what I know. But there are some markets where co-ops themselves play a significant role in financing their peers, kind of. So you have tools from co-ops, designed by co-ops, and really investing into cooperative. So it's really worth mentioning. And what can I add? Maybe also a few ethical banks. So I mentioned, so GLS, Erste Bank, and Crédit Coopérative can provide direct equity investment to social enterprises. And also there are a few also public institutions in some countries that you do not see in this visual that are also providing equity at different stages for social enterprises. Well, maybe this I will not touch upon. It was more to elaborate on the issues of the allocation of capital and the fact that we might be faced also with a plumbing problem when it comes to equity access for social enterprises. So this I will skip. The fact that impact finance, generally speaking, has been on the rise, and there has been a lot of pressure put on returns. So that was one of the last survey by the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, and stated that among their the organization surveyed, 74% were pursuing market returns. So not completely adequate when we talk about social enterprises. So that would be the issue, challenges that social finance provider or equity provider are faced with. So within the fundraising, integrate institutional investors. So there has been some progress made, but when we talk about institutional investor, quite often we talk about investment tickets that are no less than 50 million euro. So you can infer the size of the vehicle you need to design if you want to be able to take on this type of investment. It's not completely matching the size, the typical size of social enterprises, even if there are big ones. So that's a big issue. EIF has done a lot on that to really circumvent this challenge and to support social impact funds and social finance fund to raise fund. And so there has been a lot of progress made on that issue over the last 5-7 years. And maybe this I will skip. And just to be very very quick on the business model of an equity provider. They have to cover the fundraising part of their fund, so gathering capital to invest, the scouting of investee, which is quite time consuming, the selection, all the due diligence, etc. Enfin bref, all the transaction, and the transaction cost, as we mentioned before, as it's very individualized transaction compared with debt, is quite high. All the follow-up of the investment, again, very individualized because targeted towards exit. So you don't have installment coming back regularly to you as a debt provider. You need to make sure that at some point there is an exit. So it needs a close relationship and support of your investee, and managing the exit. So, bref, all these costs, all in this cost structure has to be covered by some revenue. So the typical revenue scheme for an investment fund will come from partly management fees that the GP will receive from his limited partners, from his own investor. So it's based generally so either on the commitment to the fund or on the actual investment done into enterprises. So the actual portfolio, depending on the stage of the fund you're in. And so that's part of your revenue structure. And then there are catch-up and carried revenue, which entitle you as a fund to receive 20% of all value created once you have reached the hurdle rate, which is the minimum return that your LPs require. In case of a social investment fund, the hurdle is not that high, is however quite difficult to reach, and the catch-up and carry part of the revenue model of a typical investment fund is not completely relevant, to be frank. So the most of the revenue model of the fund will be relying on management fees. So they are really core to a social impact fund business model, which means that maybe you need to raise more funds. So the thing is that as a consequence to this management fees model, there was a trend observed in the growth of the fund sizes in order to increase the fund revenue via management fees. And this is illustrated on this table, which is in French. But bon, en fait, the date here, the year is the year the organization has been created. And there you have the different funds that have been raised. So you see a clear increase. So you see, so far so good, yes, but the thing is that if you have a bigger fund, you need to make bigger transactions. So you look for bigger tickets, so you look for more mature social enterprises, which comes down to the question of Jörg at the beginning, which is, yes, in the early stages, it's quite tricky, still tricky to find funds, but again, there are more actors on this stage than before. So that's one option, growing the size of your fund. You can also add revenue streams. So typically, as a social finance provider, or if you're contemplating to design social equity providing vehicle, you might consider adding technical assistance facility, for instance, that will provide part of the non-financial support that would be borne by your team, that you can I mean, you can partly externalize the cost or get it funded from another source. And this is very much developed in all development finance, and it's coming towards social finance as well. So that's one option. And another option would be to lower costs, via cost mutualization, between vehicles or between organizations as well, which is something that has been observed. Alors, when I'm talking about this, I have one illustration in mind, but actually it's not completely. It's an experiment that hasn't that hasn't been sustainable on the long run. But Credal, which is an operator from social finance in Belgium, had created this change vehicle, really dedicated to providing equity finance to social enterprises. And there were obviously, I mean, it was so conceived that there were cost mutualization between these some functions necessary to change and Credal. So that was something that enabled this model to come into life. And exit scenarios, maybe I will, because I see the time is non, ça va. Alors, exit scenarios are a bit challenging when we talk about social economy. So what would be the option at hand? So you see in the typical venture or growth capital world, you will go towards secondary sale, so selling your shares to another subsequent investor. Merger and acquisition, so acquisition by some competitor or to generate synergy, etc., or eventually possibly IPO. There are other systems, however, so you can think about repurchasing the share as an investee to provide an exit option to your investors. So, but you need to embed this in your business model. So these are systems that have been developed, for instance, by Ethic, which is more of a real estate social enterprises focused on providing offices to other social enterprises, or SNL. Sorry, I realized there are lots of lots of French examples. SNL, which is a social housing organization with a vehicle really owning all the assets, and they have a liquidity pocket that is really just designed for keeping the ability to buying out and exiting partly their investors. And that was one of the requirements of the investors, typically the Solidarity Fund that invest in this vehicle and in other types of similar vehicles. So this having a liquidity pocket that enables you to exit partially some of your investors once you reach the critical size, now obviously, is a good option to get. Secondary sale is something that is being observed already on the market, definitely, because the market of social investors has grown sufficiently to see for those type of transactions to take place. Merger and acquisition a little bit as well. So I put here one illustration. So it was a platform for to increase the revenues of nonprofits through online donation facilitated by different type of supports. This microdon, and had been bought out by KissKissBankBank, which was a subsidiary of La Banque Postale, which is a banking group in France. So that was one illustration. But nevertheless, so there is no secondary market as an organized market yet, and voilà, exit is still quite challenging in the industry, and that's one of the hindrances of equity financing for social enterprise eventually. Alors, maybe a few words about hybridization, which is really essential when it comes to really circumventing the roadblocks toward accessing equity for social enterprises. So hybridization comes in different ways, resources, as we saw at the beginning. Hybridization of legal status, because we saw that cooperative status or non-profit status is not completely adapted when it comes to raising equity, but the combination of legal statuses can be a good way to go past this roadblock. And you have hybridization of financial instruments to see for equity-like instrument or financial instrument that have equity features without some of the challenges. Sorry about this very dense slide. So let me try and just sum it up. So the idea was just to see the place of hybrid capital at social finance intermediary level, because hybridization will happen in that case at two levels, really, at three actually. So within the social finance or social investment vehicle, at deal level, and within the social enterprises. So on the left-hand side and on the pink bubbles, you see the typical type of hindrances that we pointed out as difficulties to access to equity capital. So this governance structure, the legal form, and a possible inadequation in terms of return expectation for the investors. And hybrid capital try to address all those hindrances, so or at least part of them, and hybrid capital would be really the type of resources that will be gathered to invest. So hybrid capital is a combination of different type of resources with different return expectations. So public philanthropic and private funding, different type of private funding in between, that will be gathered by this intermediate actor to provide at deal level a combination of grant and equity, grant and debt, etc., that will have a leverage effect on commercial capital. And this hybridization of resources enable to have a VC-like approach, meaning not to be too much risk adverse, so make bold bets, being highly engaged, have the organizational capacity to provide also non-financial support, and be really patient and have this multi-year approach until exit. We're not talking about an exit at 3 years from now. And have an impact first approach as well. Let me just, I want to make sure I do not leave anything on the side. No, c'est bon. If we look at enterprise level hybrid instrument, there are tools I mentioned earlier on that are between equity and debt, that we call quasi-equity, and they have been developed to address two challenges. So the question of the ownership of the shares when you issue classic equity. So that was an hindrance both from investors and an investee point of view, and the absence of a fixed repayment schedule that is demanded by traditional debt funders. So it addressed these two challenges, and which means that they provide a reasonable level of liquidity, and they do not come with shared ownership of the business. And so it looks very much like that. But this type of tool adopts also equity features, such as risk, because these tools, they have the lowest ranking in priority for repayment in case of difficulty. So it's really risk-bearing, which is in turn de-risking other capital providers, namely banks, for instance. So it provides this leverage on debt. Other type of features regarding governance, in some cases, they allow for participation in one way or another in the governance. And also there is a link within this tool between the remuneration of your instruments and the economic performance of the enterprise. So very much close to what would be a co-ownership of the enterprise, because you're interested in the result. I don't know if I'm that clear, but voilà, that's the idea of this quasi-equity tool. A typical illustration would be with various levels of equity closeness. would be subordinated loans, sometimes with a participatory interest, so meaning that participatory interest being interest linked with the result of the net result of the enterprise. So in that case, they would be called participatory loans. You have convertible bonds. They are classified as quasi-equity, but it's a prefiguration of an equity, a participation. Convertible bonds is that you provide money with generally a bullet payment at some point in time, let's say in 5 years' time. But in between, there are options for you as a capital provider to convert, to transform this debt into real equity at a given ratio of conversion. And this is quite interesting for enterprises because, I mean, depending on the regulation, etc., it's really classified quite high in the balance sheet, and it provides an interesting leverage effect on other type of resources, namely banks again. And maybe I will just voilà. This is a typical quasi-equity tool. So it's called titre participatif in France, but I'm quite positive that there would be similar tools in other member states. So these are real quasi-equity tools in the sense that they have equity features and also debt, debt features, because they are supposed to be reimbursable. So they are emitted by cooperatives. They have a minimum duration of 7 years, so it's quite long term, I would say. So there is no repayment whatsoever before 7 years. And the investor receives a fixed interest over the course of, over the course of the contract, and also a variable rate that is indexed on, generally on EBITDA, on EBITDA. And after 7 years, the titres participatifs, they are bought out by the cooperatives upon its own initiative, meaning that if the cooperative cannot rebuy, there is no obligation. There is no obligation. It's really upon their initiative that the cooperatives buy out this tool. So that's why also it's really equity. It's really an equity tool because it's not that liquid. There is no repayment schedule. But as an incentive for the cooperatives to repay or to buy out this titre participatif, the tool sees for a step up in the interest rate. So over the course of time, the cost of this equity-like tool grows and kind of encourages you as an enterprise to buy out this titre participatif. And what happens is that's quite often, because over the course of time the enterprises grew, etc. They emit yet another bulk of titre participatif, and then kind of recycle, but also recycle this line of equity capital, but in a quite decent and healthy way. And there is a governance structure dedicated for the titre participatif holders. And usually what investors do is that they take also a pinpoint of capital, of equity capital, which bears no remuneration at all, to have access also to the governance, in a more generally speaking, to the General Assembly of shareholders. Voilà. And I put a few illustrations of the type of project that got access to such funding. So you have Village Vivant, which is a real estate cooperative that is focusing on local development. So they acquire and develop buildings, real estate assets to provide to facilitate activities of craft workers or offices, etc., in certain regions. So really less developed regions, and they raised fund via these type of tools alongside other type of tools, but because again hybridization is essential. Foncière solidaire is more it's more it's again real estate actually, but it's to enable home-based care for elderly people. You have Enercoop, which is another cooperative providing which is an energy provider, actually, distribution company. And the last picture is Eticab, which is a co-op based in France, Germany, Belgium, and a fair trade company. And all these enterprises relied or still rely on anti-participative to grow their equity. And when it comes to non-profit, you have a similar type of product, which is called titre associatif. And again, there are certainly similar tools which are called differently, but just it's interesting to know, to see the type of structuration that has been thought. Alors, it's less successful, I must say, and it's more it's more reserved for really bigger nonprofits which can afford all the very quite tedious process that requires this type of emission. But so it's reserved for nonprofits. Again, minimum duration of 7 years, a fixed rate, not any kind of flexible as I know, but it surely can be added. It's capped by law in France. And again, it's both upon initiative of the nonprofit or as soon as the nonprofit has cumulated in net result at least the amount of the emission of those titres associatifs. So it's quite risky from an investor point of view with a little remuneration. So that can explain part of the not so big success of the tool. And on the investee side, it's quite tedious again because as the fact that you get your money back as soon as you have reached this accumulation of results, you need to make sure at the moment of emission that it's been certified by commissaire aux comptes, I don't have the translation in English, but by a law officer, sort of, that you have a certain level of equity at the time of your emission, because that's the level 0 of your equity that you need to add up upon the time where you are able or allowed or entitled to reimburse your investors. So, I mean, it's quite tedious, and you have to have minimum 2 years of life before doing this. Bon, bref, so it's not ideal. And for non-profit, I would say that participatory loans, subordinated loans are much more easier to put into place. And again, it's not equity, but it's close to equity. It's junior to all other source of financing. So it can provide this leverage on debt that otherwise the non-profit doesn't benefit from. And so the last level of there are certainly other level of hybridization, but I wanted to mention is the hybridization in legal forms. So I put a few examples of social enterprises that were created as a non-profit, and in order to support their development, created a for-profit, able to take on capital, but in which the non-profit is very much involved, generally with a preferential share, priority share, or golden share, you name it, that really gives the non-profit a say in the development trajectory of the for-profit company, and especially when it comes to topic linked to impact and mission. And this has proved quite beneficial to these companies so far. And I think with that I am done. I could no, this I won't go. So voilà. I can take a question, or we can leave it there, depending on your curiosity and your level of energy.
Energy is high, as always. I have a question for you, Clementine. So what I see from some banks is that they offer portfolios for investment at relatively small returns to make investments into the social economy. Sometimes it has a focus on green transition. And these are also, I would say, more long-term investments. And if you want to participate as a customer of a bank, Triodos Bank in Germany, for example, asked for a minimum of 10,000 euros in if you want to participate in that. Do you think that that could be an option to promote the market so that banks can play a bigger role than they actually do, like by developing products like that? Or is that really for the ethical banks only?
So it would be developing products that would enable individuals to invest into social enterprises, right? Or
through the banks.
Through the banks,
I mean,
as lender, or
however banks would like to design these products. I mean, if it's just a loan, I don't know, but if it's really an equity investment, which from at least in my limited understanding, would be a long-term investment, right? So you don't look for something like a quick return, but because it's valuable, it adds value to the society. It has the social purpose. Do you think there's an opportunity for that, or is this really niche?
I mean, sustainable finance, or finance that is able to really support real economy, and especially transitioning economies, etc. I mean, it's still an important topic. Of course, as you might have observed recently, the talk is more about other type of sectors and priorities. However, the sustainability is still a topic. But I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure the issue is the type of resources the bank have at hand. I think it's more of an appraisal of the risk, no? So I mean, guarantee for me is a way. I mean, it's quite efficient, and actually that's all InvestEU is about. Is to provide equity to channel resources toward I mean, riskier seed investment. Because I mean, when you target individuals, there are also regulation issue, informative issue, etc. So it's not that easy to match the amount that you collect and the investment you do, and it would, je sais pas. What's certain is that there are tons of ethical products for individuals at different level of revenue to invest in. And what the only thing I can say is that Guarantee has done a lot, at least in France, to grow the social enterprise market, because as soon as an enterprise you have an easy access to a loan, I mean, you have fuel. You have fuel for your development, and that doesn't come that easy, this loan, on without any guarantee, without any type of guarantee. At least that what was observed a few years ago, and the guarantee really is an excellent kicker to deliver more financing option to social enterprises, because the resource is there somehow. It's just the level of risk that needs to be lowered. I'm not sure I either quite understood right the question or rightly addressed it, but that would be my take on this.
Yeah, maybe to clarify that a little bit. So we see that the Invest EU financial instruments, guarantees are really in high demand. And the demand is higher than EIB, EIF, CEB can actually serve. So, and when we think of smaller social enterprises, they probably don't fit the bill because the ticket size is too big. And the
yeah, you need intermediate. You need intermediate in any case. No, it's not.
Yeah. And where I think maybe other banks might be able to play a role, like serve as something like a public development bank. I mean, in Germany, that's quite well developed. But I'm not so sure about other countries. And of course, banks are risk averse. They don't want to use their own money and make these investments. But if they are like funds managed by a bank, where a normal person who says, well, I want to do something locally, or I really like these projects, makes an investment, is aware of the risk, would that, and I mean, obviously, equity investment is really important. Would that, or could that be an opportunity? And I also should say, I don't think there will be more public money, like on EU level, probably less. So then what are we going to do?
Yeah. But it's typically the idea of equity crowdfunding. It's really this, is that, I mean, it's not as big as a bank, but it can manage a lot of vraiment a lot of funding, and you don't need, I mean, it's investment quite democratized in the sense that you don't need to have a certain level of revenue to be authorized quite to invest, but you are protected, because that's the thing is you need to be protected as an investor, and well informed, and so I would say that this equity crowdfunding is an option, because I mean, consciously as an investor, as an individual, you choose to fund that project. But it's true that you need to design your own portfolio, which is not completely ideal, because you're not so, I mean, not you yourself, but I mean, generally speaking, as an individual, we are not all able to design the best diversified portfolio. But actually, a lot of equity platforms, I mean, or crowdfunding platforms, are also evolving in their business model to be able to distribute those type of products that can be also like support you in designing your own diversified portfolio, etc. You have ethical banks, as you mentioned, and of course, I mean, they do a lot, and this is exactly the system that you describe. Huh? You put your money in a bank that you know is going to fund this type of project, and so you channel positively resources towards those projects. And yes, InvestEU, I mean, the demand is too high for the need. as far as comment dire, as far as ticket size are concerned, I'm not so sure. I mean, it cannot be a direct link between, of course, obviously between InvestEU and the social enterprises, and that's why there are intermediaries and not only banks, really social finance intermediaries. They are also channeling these resources, and they're able to take on more risk. But yes, what would be interesting to see is how much of this guarantee from InvestEU, for instance, has been actually deterred, I mean, eaten by the risk that's really materialized. Because if eventually the money only recycled, it would mean also that nobody has taken any risk, and then the objective of the guarantee hasn't been reached. But that's another question.
That's another question. Before we go, I would like to ask our participants, do you have any questions, any comments for Clémentine? I'm very comfortable with silence. No, but if this isn't the case, Clémentine, thank you very, very much for this webinar. I think it's a really a complex topic, but it's so relevant. And let's see where this topic takes us. We have a comment from Luciana looking at how can public policy, private capital, and community-based finance be better aligned to create long-term ecosystem in which social enterprises can scale sustainability while preserving their social mission and accountability to stakeholders.
You have 2 hours.
Clémentine, I'm very happy that I have you here.
No, it's a whole question, and I'm not sure I could address this in the course of this webinar, but actually, yeah, it's the whole point. Is as you point out, Luciana, it's a multi-stakeholder question, and so anybody has to take that part. I think in this going forward, you have no sound. Okay. The documentation of case studies, I think, really illustrating what has been done, what works, and what was difficult. It's completely basic, sorry, but I think it's always extremely efficient to move forward the discussion. Voilà, so I would say document, but I think it's on its way. I mean, that was part of the Social Economy Action Plan, as far as I know. So let's hope for it.
Yeah, I would only add is like there's always this balance you have to strike between social mission
Oui.
and stakeholder interest or
Oui.
investors' interest. And personally, I believe it's impossible to keep it in a balance. So the scale will tip in one way and then the other, or think of it as a pendulum which swings from one side to right. another. It will never really stand still. I think that is the challenge, but it needs also this kind of transparency. And yeah, it's like we need to make our stakeholders happy. Otherwise, we can't fulfill our social mission. And if we don't focus on the social mission, then why are we doing it?
There is no point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tout à fait. Yeah. Transparency on the model, the way things work, and the way value is created and distributed across the whole value chain, so to say, or in very intermediated chain of capital is, I think, extremely important.
Yeah. Maybe in 10 years' time, when the market is really mature and we have these case studies and the evidence, then it might be easier to answer. But at the moment, I think it's almost impossible. I think there is no straight answers then.
which is. I'm
Clementine,
sorry,
if you
it's very
don't know, then
disappointing.
there isn't.
But it's a good food for thought
Yes.
for the time
Yeah.
ahead.
Thank you very much for this question, Luciana.
Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, then all I have to say is thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.